Hi guys, in this video we'll be discussing the truth about high blood pressure or hypertension and what you can do to treat it efficiently. High blood pressure or hypertension is often referred to as the silent killer, and although it can become problematic if left untreated or completely ignored, the fact of the matter is there's many myths, misconceptions, and misunderstandings about what high blood pressure is in the body, in the physiology, what's causing it, and therefore what you can do to efficiently or effectively treat it. The fact of the matter is the pressure in the circulation of our blood is adjusted to meet the demands and requirements of stress cells and tissues. And this goes to explain why blood pressure is gradually increased with age. That's because it's responding to the stress of aging. You see, aged bodies have aged cells and tissues which are less efficient at producing energy and therefore less resilient to stress. So they have a greater requirement or demand or need for a force of blood to the cells and tissues. So in this way, high blood pressure is a helpful adaptive response to stress. It's not something that we want to get rid of or just lower, especially without looking at the causative factors attributing to the high blood pressure. High blood pressure is a response to stress. So the major goal in treating or regulating the blood pressure is not lowering high blood pressure. It's taking a look at the chronic stress that's attributing to the chronic elevation of blood pressure. See, the major problem with anything in regards to health and disease is when something becomes chronic. The body's constantly trying to achieve homeostasis or balance. So if the blood pressure is either chronically high or chronically low, you're going to run into issues. So just as high blood pressure when chronic could lead to a variety of issues, chronically low blood pressure could result in a maladaptive response to stress. In fact, it's been observed that people whose blood pressure doesn't gradually rise with age actually have a shorter life expectancy. And this is because, again, high blood pressure in stress is a helpful response. So now that we have a better understanding about what blood pressure is and how it's working and why it's being increased in the first place, we have a better understanding about how to efficiently and effectively treat chronically high blood pressure, which basically comes back to looking at the causative stress agents and chemicals that are attributing to it. But before we get into the tips and solutions, I just want to take a short moment to further discuss how stress and stress chemicals directly attribute to high blood pressure. This will give us some helpful clues on how to efficiently or intelligently treat blood pressure irregularities. So in short, it is stress that causes high blood pressure. And chronic high blood pressure is the result of chronic stress. Now, there are a handful of stress chemicals and inflammatory mediators that attribute to stress, and I want to talk to you about what those are and how they actually attribute to high blood pressure. Now, of the many stress chemicals that attribute to high blood pressure, one of the major contributing factors is elevated serotonin. In fact, the contribution of serotonin to high blood pressure has been well established for quite some time. You see, serotonin stimulates your pituitary gland, which then activates the adrenal cortex to stimulate two stress chemicals, cortisol and aldosterone. Now, cortisol and aldosterone both directly attribute to high blood pressure. Now, looking at cortisol, in short, is catabolic in excess. So cortisol, when chronically elevated, can directly lead to the catabolism of the circulatory system, the vascular system, the tissues and cells within those systems. Now, looking at aldosterone, serotonin, in addition to activating the adrenal cortex, activates aldosterone by stimulating something called the angiotensin system, and angiotensin is a direct promoter of inflammation that leads to the injury and the degradation of the blood vessels. Not to mention that serotonin and cortisol both stimulate the production of estrogen, and estrogen is one of the major key contributing factors to the degradation of the vascular system. Estrogen is known to cause the veins to lose their tone, which could result in circulatory issues and blood pressure issues. Moving along, in addition to the chronic elevation of these stress chemicals, it's quite possible that chronically high blood pressure is just one of the many symptoms of hypothyroidism. Now, something important to understand is that one of the major adaptive responses to hypothyroidism is the chronic elevation of cortisol and all the other stress chemicals we talked about. But another more direct way that hypothyroidism can contribute to high blood pressure is due to the fact that under hypothyroidism, people typically have hypoosmolar blood, which is basically blood that has a higher affinity to fat cells. So hyperosmolar blood causes the cells in the blood to uptake fat, which stimulates or excites the vascular endothelium as well as the smooth muscle. So it causes it to become constricted, or it contributes to not only vasorestriction, but also the increased viscosity or the volume of the blood is going to decrease the free flow of the blood through the vascular system, therefore increasing the pressure of the blood. Lastly, under hypothyroidism, there's an increased production of TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, and TRH, thyrotropin release hormone. And it's been well established that TRH actually directly increases the pressure of the blood. Not to mention that TRH, or thyrotropin release hormone, also increases the production of adrenaline, norepinephrine, and prolactin, all which oppose the production of progesterone. And progesterone is one of the major steroid hormones responsible for the proper regulation of blood pressure. So with all of this in mind and a better understanding of, again, what's causing blood pressure, we have some helpful clues as to how to correct the underlying causative factors. So the first thing that I'd recommend doing is lowering the excess production of estrogen in the body. If you have high blood pressure, it's likely that you also have hypothyroidism and therefore chronically elevated levels of estrogen and cortisol. But if you can lower estrogen, you're also going to be getting rid of a contributing factor to the decreased functioning of the vascular system and the increased pressure of the blood. So some helpful things that you can do to decrease excess estrogen is to first and foremost increase your intake of dietary vitamin A. Dietary vitamin A is important for the synthesis of cholesterol into progesterone, and progesterone will oppose the excess estrogen. So that's something simple that you can do. You can get dietary vitamin A most abundantly in liver, particularly from beef, as well as egg yolks. Something else I'd highly recommend for lowering estrogen would be the use of anti-aromatase herbs. These are herbs that stop the conversion of your androgens into estrogens, and some of the best for achieving this are agaricus mushroom, pine pollen, milk thistle, and nettle root. All of these have the ability to block the aromatization of your androgens into estrogen, as well as assist your liver with detoxifying excess estrogen. The second major thing I would recommend doing is lowering the production of serotonin. Now, in general, serotonin is a stress chemical or stress mediator. So any sorts of stress is going to trigger the production of serotonin. So definitely getting a handle on stress from all angles. When I'm talking about stress, I'm talking about the lifestyle factors that contribute to stress. That's a major key point. But specifically looking at serotonin, as we learned, serotonin directly results in the increased pressure of the blood in a variety of different mechanisms. So lowering its production would be very helpful for reducing the stress response that attributes to high blood pressure. Now, looking at how to lower serotonin, there's three things I'd recommend doing. First and foremost, I'd recommend getting your gut into good shape. Your intestines or your gut produce 95% of your serotonin, and they do so when they're in a state of stress. So getting a handle on any sort of gut inflammation, gut permeability, or any sort of digestive issues would be very helpful for lowering not just serotonin, but other stress chemicals. So I'd highly recommend checking out my online course, Perfect Digestion, for getting a handle on all sorts of digestive issues. The second thing I'd recommend doing to decrease serotonin is to reduce your intake of tryptophan-rich foods. Tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin, so decreasing tryptophan will decrease serotonin production. So some foods that are incredibly rich in tryptophan are going to be bananas and other starchy carbohydrate sources. But you can just hop online, do a quick search, and find the major sources of tryptophan and just reduce or eliminate those from the diet. The last thing I'd recommend for lowering serotonin would be the use of anti-serotonin herbs like ginkgo biloba. It's well established that anti-serotonin drugs are incredibly effective for lowering blood pressure. However, instead of relying on synthetic medications, you can utilize anti-serotonin herbs like ginkgo biloba. The third thing I'd recommend is getting your thyroid into good shape. As we learned, chronically high blood pressure is just an adaptive response to stress. And thyroid hormone is the major anti-stress hormone that's going to protect your body from stress. It opposes all of the stress chemicals associated with chronically elevated blood pressure. So getting the thyroid in good shape is a good idea for regulating chronically high blood pressure. Now, there's tons of different things you can do to improve thyroid function. If you're interested in learning adequate dietary tips or optimal nutrition for metabolic and thyroid function, check out my online course, healthy weight loss course. It talks all about how to improve thyroid function, liver function, metabolic function. That course will give you a variety of dietary, supplemental, and lifestyle tips for improving thyroid function. But to give you a starting point, first and foremost, lowering the estrogen, the serotonin, and any other stress chemicals is going to improve thyroid function because it'll leave thyroid hormone unopposed. So that's very important, lowering your stress. But you can utilize clinically proven herbs for boosting the thyroid directly and indirectly. So there are 3 herbs that directly increase thyroid function. Those are gotu kola, ashwagandha, and eleuthero or Siberian ginseng. And then there are a handful of adaptogenic herbs that improve thyroid function indirectly by regulating the HPA axis and lowering cortisol and estrogen. And those are herbs like reishi, cordyceps, schizandra, and Cotinopsis, or poor man's ginseng. My 4th tip for you would be to increase your intake of dietary calcium. Now, your best sources are going to be raw, organic, grass-fed dairy. However, if you can't get it from there, you can just drink a lot of nettle leaf tea or consume a large amount of cooked leafy green vegetables. Now, this is important because it's well established. There's tons of research that shows calcium deficiency greatly attributing to chronically high blood pressure. And the reason for this is that when there's a deficiency in dietary calcium, this increases the production of parathyroid hormone and prolactin. And this causes the heart cells and the blood vessels to uptake more calcium, making them less flexible, attributing to arterial plaque within the cardiovascular system and therefore contributing to high blood pressure. My last and final tip for you would be to increase your intake of healthy salt. The avoidance or depletion of dietary salt to treat high blood pressure is perhaps one of the most counterproductive things that you can do. And this is because when there's a loss of sodium in the cell or in the body, this increases the synthesis of aldosterone, which we learn directly increases blood pressure. But not just that, aldosterone also, when chronically elevated, causes a depletion of potassium, magnesium, and calcium. So we just learned how calcium deficiency contributes to high blood pressure. But when there's a loss of potassium and magnesium, this results in vasoconstriction. So it tightens up the vascular system, making it difficult for the blood to flow freely through it. So decreasing your salt intake, bad idea. Increase your intake of healthy salts. It has a highly anti-stress effect that can positively help regulate your blood pressure. So that brings today's video to a close. If you guys found it helpful and you've enjoyed it, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Now, for those of you interested in learning more, we have written a blog post on this particular subject matter in this video, so I'll link that beneath this video in the description box below. Also, for any other additional information and resources, for any references or things I recommended throughout this video, including various additional resources as well as the herbal supplements I recommended, you can find all of that information in the description box below. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.